In that case, enjoy this webinar, and James, the floor is yours.
Okay, so basically I'll introduce myself and I'll introduce sort of the rationale of why we've put together this webinar, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the sort of framing questions that we're sort of trying to think about when we're bringing people together, and trying to make use of some of the conclusions and resources that those who will be talking after me, Debs and Gibet from DARIAH and Paola from the Open Library of Humanities, will be talking about. So essentially, part of what I'm interested in, as well as being involved in the Open Library of Humanities, I'm also a postdoctoral fellow at Trinity College Dublin, and I've been involved in some of the attempts there to build up a capacity within the college, within North, the Irish Coalition of Libraries and Universities, and some of our sort of activities to try and embed open scholarship into the library and into the college more widely. And I also, from a humanities perspective, am very interested in the creation and sort of consolidation of tools and resources that connect to the wider world of sort of open science and open scholarship from a sort of both a STEM and social science humanities sort of perspective. You know, that kind of pan scholarship tools and resources, and the training and building of training capacity in that area, but try and bring some of that down into more humanities specific problems or questions. And basically our goal here is to get talking. I mean, I'm an advocacy coordinator, and I see that as an academic capacity. I see myself as an academic who's also interested in humanities open access publishing, and wants to see the different parts of and the different communities that are interested in that topic working together and sharing what they know and sort of asking questions together, and maybe eventually being able to create some resources and train in a way that you know, benefits from a specifically humanities sort of insight. So that's where I'm coming from. And I think we're all coming from the position where we, I mean, in different ways, have become custodians of a collection of sort of knowledge and about teaching or communicating open access. And we're all sort of embedded in the humanities and have our own concerns and questions and sort of priorities. And that we'd just like to be starting a conversation about that. So I'll just start with a few basic overarching goals for what I see today being about. I'll try and be a bit quicker than my 10 minutes to give the others a bit of time to talk, because I know that we started a bit late, so apologies for that. So basically some of the goals that we like to sort of talk about today is setting a basic level of knowledge and mutual understanding around the topic. What is training the trainer, being a trainer, communicating information, the good work that's already been done on train the trainer on a broader perspective. What is it to the humanities? Who are the actors? What tools and methods are available? And I think DARIAH will be the most useful sort of way of getting into that topic today. Understanding the specific challenges of training humanities researchers and training the trainers of the humanities researchers, and any specific issues or problems that we might face. Imagining some future collaborations. So we sort of see this as a starting point in a conversation that we can keep going and start planning future events, and, you know, building up our ability to communicate with each other and think together. And what kind of activities, in fact, for example, planning an actual train the trainer humanities specific event and using it as a sort of flagship, and then trying to create some materials to standardize and, you know, reproduce that for others. And imagining future collaborations, and envisaging a community of practice which exists, you know, in other aspects of open science and open scholarship, but creating a sort of subset community of practice based around this particular topic, where we all can once again think together about the problem, and to sort of firm up a network of advocates and trainers who are interested in that topic. So a few stimulus questions. So, you know, for example, are we ready for train the trainer yet, or are we still training ourselves as trainers? So I guess the question is, how far along are we? I know what is the next sort of big leap in this sort of capacity that I'm talking about? You know, how do the different levels of knowledge vary across different domains of academic research? How is the humanities, you know, in terms of levels of knowledge that need to be accounted for, or topics that need to be accounted for? What are the sort of specificities or nuances of that we might need to be available? If we assume, as I said before, that train the trainer assumes a certain level of established knowledge, what is the minimum that we need to try and aim for across the humanities? You know, what is a good minimum, and how do we want to establish that, and then what goes next? And lastly, you know, if we're drawing on the larger training community and sort of creating a specific subset of that, what do we need in order to actually abstract from the broader non-humanities specific material that's increasingly richly proliferating in order to create something else? And some points to consider maybe as we go forward. So these come from some DARIAH policy recommendations, a sort of an establishment of some of the humanities specific challenges that we might need to consider. And the fifth is just one that occurred to me as well. So, you know, we don't have as much funding. That's one of the stimuluses of a lot of things. OLH in many ways Open Library of Humanities was created because APCs are very unaffordable for humanities researchers. So the consortial funding model was a very attractive proposition, and that lack of funding and resources led into that particular endeavour and many others. The sort of the scattered nature and different levels of digital infrastructure and support across humanities publications, which are often quite heterogeneous. And, you know, the self-archiving culture, which is in a much earlier stage than in other, I mean, we're starting to see, say, preprint archives emerging in the humanities, and things like Humanities Commons are becoming increasingly popular. But compared to the sciences, it's a different environment and a different stage, but it has different sort of questions and answers and actions that we could consider. And the proliferation and diversity of formats of publications that haven't been fully incorporated into the system, especially sort of in creative arts practice and you know, anything that involves multimedia. And the disjoint in the language of science, you know, about when people use a certain word to a vocabulary of research. Some of the words, especially for Anglophones, say humanists, words like science can be quite alienating, and there's often a terminology kind of consideration when creating training materials and thinking about training that I think although I you know, there's that overextension of that with some of the objections to Plan S, for example, that we've encountered a lot in the sort of feedback and policy recommendations. It can be a problem when specificity becomes overextended, but at the same time, it's something that's important to consider when planning a sort of training regime. So if you want some more info about that, there's some good material in that link below about from Erzsébet and Ulrike Wuttke, formerly of Parthenos, have talked about some of the sort of specific humanities issues recently, and continuing to sort of publish on that topic. So I'll go out by saying what I think I'd like to see happen next, which is, yeah, as I said, firming up a network of collaborators and with a broad range of knowledges and experiences. Establishing a network of communications. We've set up a Slack channel that at the moment is more sort of a community in search of purpose. We've got a group. You can click on this link and we'll have the slides up. We can share it on social media. You're welcome to join, but we're trying to build up a sort of communication channel that we can actually talk about these issues. And as I said before, plan some future events. We'd be happy to hear your suggestions. And maybe content, you know, between us, we've got a lot of ways of blogging and generating content, generating resources, infographics, etc. So there may be some very tangible outcomes we could work on together. So that's me, that's my setup. And what I'm going to do now is mute my microphone and pass on to our next speaker. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Miss. Thanks, James, for the nice introduction. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us today. My name is Erzsébet Tócifra, which suggests that I'm coming from Hungary, which you can probably hear in my accent as well. And I'm a linguist by profession, but for a while I'm working for DARIAH as their open science officer, which means that I'm responsible for fostering all sorts of open science practices and policies across the DARIAH network. Sorry, I just gave a little spoiler for you from our slides. And now you should be able to share my full screen. We are going to share our experiences in doing so, in doing open science in a humanities context. But before doing so, let me first tell you a couple of words about DARIAH itself. So DARIAH is a European research infrastructure for the arts and humanities scholars. Currently, we have 17 member countries and another dozen of cooperating partners. And our mission is to empower arts and humanities scholars with digital methods to create, connect, and share knowledge about culture and society. So, yes, a research infrastructure might sound rather abstract, but you can imagine DARIAH as a network of tools and services and working groups that allow us to share knowledge, to share tools, to share data, to share networks, and to share a voice to be heard in national and European policy debates, for instance, about the future of scholarly communication, among others. Probably the easiest way for you to connect with DARIAH is to visit the website and check the many-point working groups. We have all sorts of cross-national, cross-disciplinary working groups like AI and music, numismatics, women writers. Go and explore. I think that I'm pretty sure that many aspects and many components of open science are implicitly and naturally present in what we are doing in DARIAH, but still today I would like more to talk about the most explicit open science activities of ours that are the advocacy and training work that we do in the humanities domain. So there are lots of questions we need to systematically address in order to pave the way for an open humanities agenda. Some of them had already been mentioned by James. And you can see some others on my slide here. But two of them are especially important for our work here. On the one hand, we see that in many cases, humanities scholars already do fully fledged open science without implicitly branding them as such. So the question is how to increase the profile of these innovations coming from the humanities domain within the global open science paradigm. So this is one thing. The another thing is that we do believe that open science works best when it's truly deeply anchored into the specific disciplinary communities and community of practices. But still what we see is that in many cases there is this huge gap between the high-level principles of open research culture and the community practices. So although many humanities scholars find the values like transparency or accountability or reusability of their work very important, in many cases we still have difficulties or even limitations in translating these values into our own practices. And if we think of keywords from open science like reproducibility or pre-registration or publication of null results, sometimes we feel that we found not much resonance with these points of the general open science agenda. So to fill this gap between the high-level principles and the humanities practices, and just explore our own identity in the open research culture, recently we launched a blog called DARIAH Open. That is a place to explore all sorts of pathways to the open research culture as they specifically pertain to the research communities in the arts and humanities. So we bring and we will bring together news, resources, interviews with experts, success stories, maybe later also disaster stories, and also debates on discipline-specific challenges from around open humanities. In terms of open access, in a humanities context, we found really important to help our communities to think critically about the availability of their own work, about the maintenance of their own work, and build a digital sovereignty across our networks. And importantly, we are not only preaching about this, but we also provide them with infrastructural components for doing so. So we give them space in the French repository called Hall. And in a humanities context, another important mission is to debunk this myth that green open access, that gold open access equals high publication fees. So we want to connect our communities with fair open access service providers who are based on alternative business models, but I think Paola later will talk about this in more detail. Also, we want to use this blog to amplify the work, the good work done in our national consortia and in our working groups. And so we cannot imagine doing this without keeping an intense dialogue with our communities. For instance, our first guest blog post is going to be published this week, so stay tuned. We are doing assessments. We are planning to publish interviews with different members of our communities. So please take it as an invitation. Feel free to engage with the blog, suggest us topics to cover. And importantly, all of the posts are licensed under Creative Commons CC BY license, which means that you are free to take them, reuse them, build on them. For instance, we were really happy and also a little bit proud to see that one of our posts recently had been translated into Spanish. So that's the DARIAH Open blog. And in complementary to this exchange we are having on the blog, in 2019, we also launched another open science service, which is a help desk service that allows humanities scholars to directly turn to us with their questions and challenges regarding all open things. So later on, we are planning to publish a knowledge base from some of these recurrent questions. The second approach we take to increase the visibility of good open research practices across the humanities, in this case across the digital humanities, is the Open Methods meta blog. So at DARIAH we saw that one of the major challenges of present-day knowledge production in the digital humanities is to communicate the research results in a way that is well aligned with the increasingly digital research workflow of ours. So scholars want to interlink their publications with their codes, with the corpora they're using, with the data sets they're using. Also, the publication workflow is sometimes very slow and took years to get your results out, and by the time it might be obsolete. So we started to experiment with a more dynamic and more flexible form of scholarly communication. And this is the Open Methods platform that brings together and highlights all kinds of openly available, open access content types about digital humanities tools and methods. So it can be a blog post, it can be a preprint, it can be a video, a podcast, whatever. So the relevant content can be nominated by anyone. Even you can send us pieces of content that you think might be relevant in the context of digital humanities tools and methods. You can just simply ping us on Twitter. You can find our Twitter handle in the corner. So content nomination, content suggestion is open to everyone. But there is an editorial team who decides about which content pieces to republish and enrich on the blog. So they are currently multicultural, and they are a multicultural and multilingual group of digital humanities experts, currently 25 editors from 11 countries, and they are speaking altogether 16 languages. So really, this is the amazing community power in which makes this platform, I think, unique. And this community reviews the content very briefly, add little introductions in which they explain the relevance of the content in question to our community, and republish them on the platform. So you're very welcome to explore open methods, follow us, feed us, and if you're interested in joining our team, you know where to find me. And I think at this point, I will give the floor to my colleague, Deborah. Debs.
Hello, I hope you can hear me. I'm Deborah Thorpe. So I'm the Training and Education Officer for DARIAH. I work very closely with Erzsébet in her role, but I work in Dublin, whereas Erzsébet works in Berlin. So it's really a pan-European team at DARIAH. So I'm going to jump in and talk a bit about training and education within DARIAH, both generally and where it relates specifically to open scholarship and open access publishing in the humanities. So DARIAH provides, participates and disseminates training to researchers of all levels, all career levels, but also all levels of experience relating to digitally enabled and enhanced research. So just recognising that those two areas, career level and levels of experience, are not synonymous in relation to digital research and open access publishing. An important element of that is ensuring that scholars are better informed about their options when deciding on the dissemination strategies for their research. One of our missions is to help equip researchers with the skills that they need, or you need, to excel in a modern and open research environment. This can take many forms. We regularly offer masterclasses, summer and winter schools, but also online training resources, and I'll talk a bit more about those later. But also to recognise that these formats, so the face-to-face and the online, interact, and that's part of my role at DARIAH. So increasingly face-to-face training and education initiatives are captured and disseminated online, and that's very important. And then they're reused by different trainers when they're training learners and other trainers. But also online training, such as the webinars like the one we're participating in, are increasingly adapted for face-to-face use. And we at DARIAH recognise the need to adapt and to be flexible to these different training environments when designing our resources. So Erzsébet, if you could move to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a bit about our face-to-face training initiatives. We organise and collaborate in a range of different face-to-face training initiatives. But here I've decided to focus on a particular event related to open access publishing to give you a flavour of what we're doing. And this workshop was entitled How to Make the Most of Your Publications in the Humanities, and was jointly organised by Foster Plus and DARIAH EU. It was held in Berlin in January 2019. And the event covered a range of different issues relating to publishing in the humanities, touching on guidance on issues such as monograph publishing and alternative models of open book publishing, open peer review, publishing practices for cross-reference data sets and research articles, and as well as lectures delivered to an audience. We also had 3 hands-on sessions focusing on open licensing, self-archiving of publications, and open data management. So you can move on to the next slide, Elisabeth. So as I said, as well as our face-to-face initiatives, we also have a whole plethora of online resources. And we call this really our training and education ecosystem at DARIAH. And it includes a range of different materials distributed over many different platforms and aimed at different needs and audiences. However, I want to just draw your attention here to the Parthenos training suite. And that currently, the range of modules offered on the training suite concern mainly research infrastructures, but with a particular focus on interoperability and sustainability. And the resources on Parthenos are aimed at both learners and trainers from a variety of different backgrounds and a variety of different competence levels. And I've pointed here to a particular module which you may find very useful, entitled Manage, Open Up and Improve Your Research and Data. And there's a link there on the slide if you want to go and have a look at this after the webinar. And all of our modules are designed to be used and reused according to the learner and the trainer's particular needs, whether that's using them all in one go or dipping in and out as is required. I do have a few more things to say about training and education, which we can address in the question and answers, but I'm just going to pass back on to Elisabeth here because I'm very conscious of time. So.
Oh, yes, just a couple of more thoughts. I'm not sure whether we are well on time, but so we also see the value in bringing humanities perspectives to global open science events, trainings, and organizations, because this is a means to increase the profiles of humanities in the general global open science paradigm. But we also see the value in the reciprocal approach that is bringing open science to humanities events. So we are regularly attending digital humanities or humanities conferences. So if you are planning to attend the digital humanities conference in Utrecht in late June, chances are very high that we are going to meet there. And so in these events, it can be very revelating, and it's always very powerful, such a powerful experience when we need like-minded people, we need other humanities scholars who are committed to the open. But one of the questions that regularly comes up, and I think this is similar, well, this is one of the, resonates with James' questions from the beginning, is that how to take this further, so how we can go beyond the usual suspects on the first place, how we can address scholars who are not very experienced with working in a digital, and on the other, how can build a global community of humanities scholars who are committed to the open scholarship. I also put together some of our takeaways. Sorry for the extremely crowded slide, but I think we can take them, we can just keep them for the discussion part. And so to the last slide, we collected some of our resources. Feel free to explore them, feel free to reuse them. Thank you.
Hello. So let me share my presentation first. Great. So I'm Paola Clemente Vega, and I'm the marketing officer of the Open Library of Humanities. I will first introduce the Open Library of Humanities, then I will give a quick overview of the open access context in which the Open Library of Humanities operates, and then I will talk a little bit about what we are doing in terms of training and advocacy in the humanities. So the Open Library of Humanities is a scholar-led project that facilitates open access publishing by removing all author charges. We support academic journals from across the humanities disciplines, as well as hosting our own multidisciplinary journal, which is also called the Open Library of Humanities. And at the moment, we publish a total of 28 titles. We are part of a growing global community of non-for-profit publishers that explore different business models and innovative approaches to open publishing. We are also funded by an international library consortium of more than 230 institutions, where each member pays an annual fee according to the country and size of the institution. So our idea is that research organizations and libraries make a relatively small contribution that can cover the cost of running a publication platform on which peer-reviewed scholarly journals can then be published as open access. Let me see, how can I go to the, yeah. Right. So academic publishing, it's currently dominated by a hybrid environment, which is made by two predominant economic models. On one hand, we have the gold open access, with author processing charges, APCs, in which either the institutions or the academic has to pay an amount which its average estimated APC cost could be something between 1,500 and 2,000 that academics and institutions need to pay in order to have their research published in open access channels. And then we have the traditional subscription model, in which you need to subscribe and therefore pay in order to have access to that content. What happened is that in the last 30 years, around 30 years, since 1986, the subscription costs for academic journals have risen by 300% above inflation, so imagine. While at the same time, there are more and more academics producing and publishing research, which has triggered what is known as the serial crisis, which means the inability of libraries to keep pace with the prices set by publishers. The result is that commercial goals do not align with scholarly goals. And this is when a scholar-led open access initiative emerged as a result of frustration and a critical attitude towards the ongoing commercialization of publishing, alongside a growing awareness among scholars of open access publishing options. It was also created as a way of survival. Take, for instance, the example of the humanities with the Open Library of Humanities, or in the Global South with Cielo, Redalyc, or Amelica. So therefore, it emerged as a matter of sustainability. So what happened is that the APC logic doesn't work well in the humanities. And why? Because the humanities and social sciences are poorly funded by comparison to other scientific disciplines. And therefore, these APCs will have the effect of shutting down scholarly communication, particularly for early career researchers like myself. I'm still a PhD student, postgraduates, independent scholars, and academic, at least research-intensive institutions or institutions in the Global South. And this is why the distributions of economics is the most important factor for academic publishings in the humanities and in the Global South. So it is within this context that non-profit, scholar-led, academic, open access initiatives emerge. In order to thrive and survive, they also need to test new economic models, as for instance, as we can see here, consortium funding models like the Open Library of Humanities, or work together through collaboration and pooled expertise, which includes developing systems and practices that allow presses to provide each other with forms of mutual support through the creation of open infrastructures, tools, and services. As you can see here, for example, we have open infrastructures, tools, and services such as Open Journal Systems, Genaway, that was created by developers based at Birkbeck University and working for the Open Library of Humanities. We have Cielo, which I mentioned before, Amelica, and many more. And then we do also have institutions like DARIAH, for example. We have Elizabeth and Debs here from DARIAH. Then we have Foster Open Science, which are helping us and coordinating this webinar. We have many of them, Bartanons, Open Air, and many more. So what happened is that learning how to navigate in this digital context requires time. And keeping up to date with all the latest developments and knowing what is available also requires support and communication. That is why training is important. Open access is strong when its community of academics, librarians, communication experts, engineers are strong. And that means being confident and familiar with what is available. With that in mind, in 2018, we launched the initiative Empower, which is a new marketing initiative that was launched by James Smith, who used to work for the Open Library of Humanities before I joined in June. It's a new marketing initiative which is designed to strengthen humanities open access with blog posts, social media conversations, open access resources, and an advocacy network which James is also coordinating. The core of Empower can be summarized in one sentence. So the best way to promote the Open Library of Humanities is to strengthen the humanities open access context in which the Open Library of Humanities operates. So when the Open Library of Humanities is strong, then scholar-led open access is strong, and vice versa. As part of Empower, we, for example, have created a section on our website with resources. We have, for example, posters, we have facts with questions and answers related to the Open Library of Humanities, open access, and the humanities. We do also have a glossary of open access terms. We have a bibliography. We also have a video we produced in collaboration with Derek Jarman Lab some months ago. Debs, for example, is part of the video. The video, it's about the Open Library of Humanities and shares interview between staff members of the platform and people involved in open access. We are now in the process of adding to our advocacy page multilingual resources, because we think that is very important. Not everybody can understand English. And we have translated some of our resources like the glossary of open access terms, the fact question, the prospectus as well, into Spanish, Italian, Russian, French, German as well. And then as part of Empower, we do also have a blog in which we have this initiative, the Open Insight initiative, in which we invite editors from our special collections or people involved in open access, open science initiatives to write a blog post for us or to do an interview. For example, last week, we just released an interview we did with Ariana Becerril, who is the president of Amelica. And the interview in which she talked about the new platform, Open Access in the Global South, is available in Spanish and in English. And as part of this Open Insight initiative, we also organized Twitter chats as a way to continue with the conversations raised in our blog post. We had one last week with Ariana Berserir, in which people could debate all what is related to open access on the Global South and America. And then we are going to have another one on Friday this week about Pride, which is one of our special collections. And then I think James said something before about the Open Library Advocacy Network, so I don't need to talk too much about that. But the Open Library Advocacy Network is a new space where open access early career researchers, scholars, editors, librarians, or information specialists can have a conversation, share information, propose new initiatives, and provide feedback. This webinar, for instance, has been organized by advocacy members and by the advocacy coordinator, James Smith. And I hope it will help continue with the conversation and so contribute together to build a humanities open access landscape that responds to the needs of humanities scholars and early career researchers. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much for all of this. Is there anybody of you who still wants to say something? I don't have the program in front of me.
I'll just say a few more words, if I may, relating to training and education. So I just wanted to kind of, I thought of a few kind of stimulating questions that in my role as training and education officer have been coming up time and time again, and connect really well with what I think all four of us have been saying. So I'll just kind of throw them out there as thinking points, because I don't think there are any easy answers, but I think they're a good thing for us to think about in kind of discussing open access in relation to humanities scholarship. So I'll see if I can just share my screen, because I had, here we go.
Yeah, it's a bottom. Did you see the bottom?
Yeah, okay. So I have here my PowerPoint I provided. So I'll just skip straight to the questions. So here's my introductory slide. So with DARIAH, we are a research infrastructure. So our training is very different from that offered by universities. So I just want to point out that that's the kind of perspective that we're coming from. So some of our skills relate as well towards lots of different careers, including the OLTAC or post-AC careers, as well as research, traditional research careers. So that's the kind of context that my role comes from in relation to humanities open access. But just to skip directly to the kind of questions that I wanted to raise. So I think James said this a little bit here. We talked about train the trainers, but who are these trainers that we want to train in open access, humanities open access? What kind of level of open access knowledge and experience do they have? Do they have needs as well as trainers? And then who are the individuals who these trainers are hoping to pass knowledge and experience onto? What career stage are we hoping to pass open access knowledge to? And what relation does career stage have to knowledge, existing knowledge and engagement with open scholarship? I think that's an important question. We often think of career stage as being synonymous with knowledge level, and that's definitely, you know, from my own experience, not the case when it comes to humanities open access. And within, we talk about the humanities, but what kind of discipline or disciplines are we looking at? There are different nuances within disciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. And what impact does career stage have on how people want to develop their knowledge? So what kind of training initiatives are we developing, and how does that relate to career stage? And then finally, I think this is a very important question. A lot of the work in humanities advocacy is being done by individuals who are at an early career stage and maybe in precarious academic employment. So what are we actually asking of these trainers in terms of labour when they're passing on their knowledge and skills? And just lastly, to kind of move on to inclusivity, and I have my obligatory medieval image here. I'm a medievalist, you know, I'm very interested in reaching that community, balancing the need to remain at the cutting edge of discussions. As Elisabeth mentioned, with the open science community, we need to be part of that discussion as humanities scholars, but we also need to prioritise engaging learners who are not already part of those communities. So people who want to know more about open access, but who come from maybe the area of the scholarly societies or traditional humanities research areas. So really training trainers, or as ourselves as trainers, to preach beyond the choir when it comes to open scholarship and open access publishing. So I'll stop there so we can move on to some discussions.
I have a small point, like just very quickly, I'd like to add, if I may. I think if we're thinking in sort of spatial terms, like what we've seen so far is that we've each got our own area where we've operated, and we've all, and I imagine those who are listening in also have the sense that they've built up certain things adjacent to their immediate area of expertise. But I think what we were trying to do is drift into a new space that's sort of between all of the areas in which we operate, where we can actually start to sort of, you've heard there's so many resources. I think we're very rich in resources, and importantly, I think salaried experts who have time to put thought into these things. But as well as the precarity issue that Deb's raised earlier. But I think we need to start spinning things out of that into something like that as Deb's mentioned, targets perhaps people that aren't part of our community. Sometimes we have a tendency to talk to each other, and, you know, we go to meetings and we end up talking about the same things to each other, updating each other on things that we've all been doing. But if, you know, we have the expertise and the knowledge to make things out of our expertise that are not for us and aren't about us. And I guess that's the whole point of this advocacy network initiative, is how can we think together as beyond our immediate sort of backgrounds. So that's just my little point I wanted to add in.
Can I just say something? That's, for example, in my point of view, I'm also a PhD student, and yes, as you have also mentioned, the early career researchers are and PhD students, we are in a precarious situation. Many of us, we don't even have time to attend training sessions because we have to, like me, we have to organize our time because we are sometimes working full-time, doing PhDs. So that's why I think that, for example, organizing webinars, interviews, blog posts, are really important, because this is something we can do when we are at home, because my university, Birkbeck University, they are constantly organizing training opportunities. I can't attend many of these training opportunities because I really don't have time. I think it's such a privilege, like being able to attend all these amazing opportunities. That's why, for example, I have found webinars really, really useful, and blog posts, as well as what DARIAH is doing with its new blog, or what we are doing. I think it's just crucial. And thank you.
Okay, so there's one comment in the chat from Melanie Rittlisberger. So I'm an early career researcher with a 3-year contract postdoc too, and I struggle to include all the open access work into my regular job. I find online webinars a great way to participate.
Thanks a lot for your comment, Melanie. It's really, it was really like a pleasure. Yeah, but I would like to add to your comment, and I think you're voicing many of the researchers in a postdoc situation, or the researchers in a postdoc situation, is that, you know, what we see is that in some cases you don't need to make massive investments into these things. You don't need to be aware of what are the different business models in open access. You don't need to be aware of all the infrastructure and nitty-gritties, but just you don't even need to be technically oriented somebody. So this is an issue. We also see many cases that humanities scholars who are not working with computational or digital methods, they find sometimes this open agenda very much technical oriented, and the stack talk can intimidate them from time to time. But you know, you can be open in many ways, and you can just take some very small steps, like setting up a Twitter account with channels, people, professionals who you trust in, whose work you find relevant, or just be brave enough to share to take a deep breath and share your random thoughts on a blog post, which could later be turned into a fully fledged research article, but can remain also as a blog post and can be useful as such. So what I'm saying is that there are many small steps people can take, and we definitely don't need to be open science gurus to do that.
I think that's a really good point as well, that often when we think about open access advocacy, we look at the level of funding or infrastructure, or you know that kind of level of building things that other people can use, you know, in the sort of in certain areas of open access or open scholarship. But I think maybe something we could think about is that it's entirely possible to create resources that do operate on that very, like, you know, low level, just like convincing another member, your co-author, to write a paper, open access, convincing someone, even when you're, say, you know, someone at an undergraduate level or a PhD student, anyone at any level, there are interventions that they can make that aren't taxing on their time. And I think that's something that is important that we can attend to as well in this, if we think beyond maybe our immediate sort of infrastructure building, you know, skill sets, as it were.
And of course, if you have any like detailed, concrete questions, feel free to use the services. Let's stay in touch. Ping us on the DARIAH help desk or whatever. We are totally at your disposal.
Okay, so there's another question or a remark. It would be great if researchers know who to contact to ask questions. For example, someone at someone's own university or an open access ambassador. I have an impression that a lot of people just don't know about the open science movement because they're not on Twitter, or they just haven't heard of it yet. So in a way, Plan S initiated a discussion about this.
Oh yes, this is one of the most wonderful things happen in the context of the Plan S, that it generated a lively discussion within scholars. So the primary, you know, the primary target group of the whole Plan S issue. It was amazing to see how many scholars from different disciplinary groups just stood up and started to share finally their opinion about the future of their own scholarly communication. So this was amazing. In terms of who to turn to, this is, I think, a very valid point. And so what I can suggest, there are advocacy networks, of course, like the OLH, like the DARIAH, but You know, in many cases, I think librarians are very powerful allies of ours when it comes to open access publishing, data management, whatever. So it could be a good first step to visit your institutional library and see what they can offer to you.
And I think increasingly as time goes on, librarians are starting to they're becoming increasingly active in being a contact point. And I know that the librarians at my university are very enthusiastic about figuring out how they can let, especially the student body, know about what they know. So I guess something else that we maybe can think about is when we're training, or, you know, how can we help to connect the different bits at a, say, a university level? How can we help to maybe at that level? Because that could also be very valuable, I think.
Okay, so if no more questions pop up in the chat, I think we can close up this this webinar. Thank you very much to all our speakers. I think it was very interesting.